In 1945, as the world staggered toward the end of the bloodiest conflict in history, a handful of sealed reports and whispered transmissions hinted that not every battle had ended. Across burned-out cities and frozen coastlines, Allied intelligence teams encountered evidence of something deeper: operations erased from record, laboratories that detonated before capture, and men who vanished into exile carrying knowledge that was never meant to exist. For decades, these fragments have surfaced only as blacked-out documents, censored testimonies, and brief mentions in restricted archives. Together they form a pattern, a hidden war fought beneath the surface of victory itself, where science, secrecy, and survival blurred every moral line. Chapter 1. The Vanishing of Operation Iron Wave. The last winter of the Reich was one of collapse, confusion, and denial. Yet amid the chaos of February 1945, Allied monitoring posts along the Baltic Sea began intercepting bursts of encrypted Morse traffic unlike any other. The signals were faint but persistent, originating from the frozen coastlines east of Königsberg. The British classified the intercepts under the provisional code name Iron Wave. Analysts at Bletchley Park described the transmissions as a variant of the Enigma naval cipher, but with modulation, anomalies suggesting experimental frequency shift encoding. The messages ceased abruptly on April 9th, the day Königsberg fell to the Red Army. Following the German surrender, US Navy intelligence dispatched a small unit, Naval Technical Mission Europe, Section E13, to investigate the origin of the Iron Wave signals. Their reports, declassified only in fragments in 1979, mention a ruined port facility on the Frischeshafen near Pillau. Beneath the debris of a scuttled U-boat pen, engineers discovered reinforced doors leading to a subterranean corridor flooded with brackish water. Scrawled on the concrete wall above it was a phrase in faded paint: Gruppe Nord, 4, well. Beyond that, nothing but silence. The mission commander, Lieutenant Commander Harold O'Neill, filed his last field note on May 18th. Entrance compromised, all traces removed, no personnel recovered. For years, Iron Wave remained a closed subject within Allied archives. Yet in 1952, a new anomaly reignited interest. A British signal station in Port Stanley, Falkland Islands, intercepted an ultra-low frequency transmission carrying an identical pattern to the 1945 Königsberg code. The source was triangulated somewhere off the Patagonian shelf, near coordinates 46 degrees, 61 Madagascar, thousands of miles from the Baltic. The Admiralty requested assistance from the newly formed CIA Office of Naval Research. What followed was a joint Anglo-American investigation, codenamed Project Neptune File, whose existence was denied for over 3 decades. Declassified correspondence between the CIA and the Royal Navy Intelligence Division describes Operation Iron Wave as indicative of an unauthorized continuation of Axis research into subaqueous propulsion. The specific reference to type Funti-Wien derivatives suggested that several of Germany's advanced U-boats might have escaped capture. The Type Funti-Wien series, often called Elektroboote, were decades ahead of their time. Streamlined hulls, snorkel-equipped engines, and the capacity to remain submerged for extended periods. Most were destroyed or surrendered at war's end, but 5 hull numbers, U-3532 through U-3536, were never accounted for in Allied post-war inventories. Cross-checks revealed that those same submarines were last assigned to a Baltic Fleet division, operating under Oberkommando Marinegruppenkommando Nord, directly tied to the Königsberg region. An Argentine naval report, suppressed until 1989, documented unidentified underwater acoustic phenomena near Bahia Blanca in June 1947. Locals reported seeing lights beneath the waterline, followed by a low-frequency hum that persisted for hours. The Argentine government dismissed the claims as seismic activity. However, CIA case file 7293-IR lists this incident under post-war Axis exfiltration events, alongside others concerning alleged Nazi escape routes via Patagonia. Within those same archives lies a single blurred photograph labeled Recovered Debris, Sector 46 Alpha. The image shows a corroded metal plate bearing the partial serial U-35 and a faint eagle insignia. The mystery deepened when a former Kriegsmarine radio operator, captured by the Soviets and later repatriated in 1955, gave an interview under British supervision. His testimony, recorded at the Bad Nendorf Interrogation Center, described being stationed at a North installation where boats left under ice cover with orders to avoid surrender. He referred to a project called Energy Nullpunkt, 0 point energy, claimed to be linked with a new propulsion type tested under the Iron Wave program. When asked to clarify, the man recanted his statement, claiming he had been coerced by Soviet interrogators to invent the name. The interview transcript ends abruptly with the note, "Subject transferred to US custody, Camp King, June 12, 1955. No further documentation exists." In 1963, oceanographic surveys conducted by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution recorded unexplained magnetic distortions off the Argentine coast. The anomalies were described as consistent with large metallic masses resting on the seabed. When naval researchers attempted to revisit the coordinates, access was denied by the US Department of Defense, citing sovereignty concerns. A Freedom of Information Act request decades later revealed that the area had been quietly leased to a private contractor conducting deep marine salvage for the Navy. None of the salvage data has ever been released. Files recovered from German archives after reunification in 1991 provide an unsettling footnote. A Foldermarkt Reichstechnische Gruppe Nord contained receipts for tungsten, mercury, and uranium oxide shipments dated late 1944. The materials were routed through a firm called Ostsee Industriewerke GmbH, a shell company later traced to the Abwehr's logistics branch. Several of the requisition forms bore the signature of Dr. Walter Hagemann, a physicist affiliated with Peenemunde's propulsion division. Hagemann disappeared in May 1945. His name resurfaced in a CIA personnel index from 1958 under the entry Consultant, Energy Research, South America. Whether Iron Wave represented an escape convoy, a weapons test, or a final act of desperation remains uncertain. Every official attempt to cross-reference the operation has led to missing pages and conflicting testimonies. The Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee, CIOS, maintained a dossier on Baltic scientific evacuation assets until its closure in 1951. That file was subsequently sealed under NATO Directive 214 Charge 7, its contents classified non-existent. Researchers granted limited access in 1978 reported that the folder contained no original documents, only carbon copies of requisitions and a single typed note. All relevant materials transferred to foreign custody under Executive Order 9981B. In 2004, an ocean survey by a private Argentine research team detected a large metallic structure at a depth of 310 meters off the Patagonian coast. The sonar image showed a vessel approximately 80 meters long with an unorthodox hull contour inconsistent with known U-boat classes. 2 months later, the research license was revoked, and all expedition data confiscated by Argentine naval intelligence. The lead researcher, Dr. Emilio Vargas, later claimed he was warned not to involve foreign press for reasons of national cooperation. His vessel's navigation logs were later found erased. Today, the official stance of both NATO and Argentina remains consistent. There is no evidence of surviving Axis submarines or unacknowledged operations beyond 1945. Yet among naval historians and intelligence archivists, Iron Wave has become a ghost file, a reference to the unprovable and the suppressed. Its trail crosses continents, agencies, and decades, always ending in black ink and silence. The only surviving physical trace, a fragment of radio transcript preserved in the Public Record Office, reads, "Signal received 09 April 1945. Source, Königsberg sector." Message fragment follows, "Initiate relocation protocol. The sea will remember our passage." No one has ever decoded what that meant, nor where those who sent it were heading. Chapter 2. The Forgotten Siege of Fortress Adler. High in the Dachstein Alps, where Austrian limestone gives way to glacier and mist, local villagers spoke for years of distant thunder during the spring of 1945, explosions that rolled through the mountains long after the guns of Vienna fell silent. They said it came from inside the mountain itself, from a place that did not appear on any wartime map. That place was Fortress Adler, a rumored installation carved deep into the rock beneath Mount Dachstein, constructed under the authority of the Schutzstaffel's Ahnenerbe Research Division. It never officially existed. No blueprints, no requisitions, and no surviving orders mention it. Yet Allied intelligence, cross-referencing intercepted German communications and post-war testimonies, found enough fragments to mark Adler as one of the Reich's final strongholds of scientific secrecy. The earliest mention appears in a January 1945 cable from the SS Technical Office in Berlin to an entity identified only as Bergwerkstelle 12. It authorized the evacuation of Tier for research, personnel and containment of experimental apparatus. Designation Morgensturm translated as Morning Storm, was associated with an experimental propulsion and atmospheric research project that combined aeronautical physics with what the Allies later called non-conventional energy studies. The cable bore the signature of SS Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler, the same man responsible for V2 production and for coordinating the construction of Germany's most secret underground facilities when the 10th Mountain Division of the US Army advanced through the Austrian Alps in April 1945. They reported encountering unusual resistance in the Dachstein sector. Official after-action reports describe sporadic sniper fire and demolished access tunnels that suggested controlled demolition rather than random destruction. Local informants pointed toward a high-altitude cave system above Hallstatt, where German trucks had been seen hauling heavy machinery throughout the winter. Major Robert L. Eames, commanding a reconnaissance platoon, later testified that his men discovered a sealed tunnel mouth reinforced with steel plates and partially fused by heat intense enough to melt stone. Inside the wreckage, fragments of lab instruments were found, oscilloscopes, ceramic insulators, and pressure valves stamped with the mark of Heinkel Flugzeugwerke. On April 29th, 2 days before Germany's unconditional surrender, an explosion of unknown magnitude shook the entire Dachstein range. A local farmer, Karl Hinterseer, recalled a pillar of red light rising from the mountain, then silence. The event was dismissed by Allied intelligence as an ammunition detonation until 1948, when declassified OSS memoranda surfaced describing film reels recovered near Hallstatt depicting experimental high-altitude craft. Those reels, placed under custodial review by the newly formed CIA, disappeared en route to Langley in 1950. The only surviving evidence is a log entry from OSS courier Lieutenant Warren Daly. Film canisters labeled M. Sturms 3A5F, retrieved from site Adler, destination Washington. Nothing further appears in the archive. In the decades following the war, rumors of Fortress Adler persisted among locals and mountain guides who stumbled upon vent shafts and concrete remnants buried beneath the snow. In 1961, Austrian geologists surveying the Dachstein Glacier for tunneling stability accidentally broke into a sealed cavity 30 meters wide. Inside, they found vitrified rock and metallic residue embedded in the walls. Samples sent for analysis revealed traces of thorium and depleted uranium, materials unlikely to occur naturally. The Austrian government quietly halted the survey, citing environmental hazard. Yet within 6 weeks, the site was cordoned off by military police under direct order of the Ministry of the Interior. Officially, no such cavern was found. The Soviet Union, too, maintained an interest. Captured German physicist Dr. Kurt Deibner, questioned by Soviet NKVD scientists at Laboratory No. 2 in Moscow, referred vaguely to an alpine facility engaged in studying plasma aerodynamics. He claimed the project was under Kammler's supervision and that the Americans would never find it because it was already sealed from within. Deibner's testimony appeared in a 1952 classified Soviet report titled Technologische Experimente Dachstein, now partially declassified. One excerpt reads, "Evidence suggests self-destruction protocol initiated at site Adler. Subject reports test of atmospheric ion engine. Terminated by premature overload. Soviet analysts concluded the installation had been obliterated, deliberately to prevent capture. Western researchers rediscovered the story through the archives of the German Federal Intelligence Service, BND, in the late 1980s. Among unmarked microfilms, labeled Nachlass Kammler, was a hand-drawn schematic of a subterranean network titled Project Morgensturm, Stufe Dry. The plan depicted concentric tunnels converging on a central chamber marked Versuchsraum B, Test Chamber B. Measurements indicated a diameter of 40 meters, consistent with the scale of experimental aircraft assembly. What drew immediate attention, however, were the annotations referencing Blaufeld generator and Anti-Schwerkraft Versuchsanlage, terms suggesting research into field propulsion. The authenticity of the schematic has never been verified, but handwriting analysis matched Kammler's signature. Further corroboration emerged from the interrogation transcripts of captured SS engineer Dr. Wilhelm Auer, detained by the Americans under Operation Paperclip. During questioning at Camp Overcast in 1946, Auer mentioned being transferred to a mountain base near Hallstatt in early 1945 to assist with auxiliary power systems. When pressed, he described a humming resonance that shook the floor when the main array was tested. The interviewer noted his apparent fear and reluctance to elaborate. Auer died in a car crash in 1948, shortly before reassignment to the US Jet Propulsion Program. No notes from his subsequent interviews survive. The physical evidence of Adler's existence remains circumstantial, yet too consistent to dismiss. Aerial photography, conducted by the Austrian Bundesheer in 1974, revealed geometric subsidence patterns on the southern face of Mount Dachstein, consistent with man-made tunnels collapsing under pressure. The photographs were classified as part of a geological survey, then quietly removed from public archives. When investigative journalist Maria Lechner requested access in 1992, her inquiry was rejected on grounds of national security under NATO cooperation. She later published a limited report citing anonymous defense sources who claimed that the Adler tunnels were stabilized in the 1950s to contain residual contamination from wartime experiments. No official response was issued. The last known exploration attempt occurred in 2009 when a team of Austrian cavers, using ground-penetrating radar near the Eishöhle cave, detected a hollow chamber at a depth of 180 meters. Before excavation could begin, their permit was revoked. Local authorities cited instability risks, though seismic readings that month showed no increased danger. The radar imagery, leaked anonymously online years later, revealed a rectangular structure roughly 40 by 25 meters, dimensions strikingly similar to those in Kammler's Test Chamber B sketch. Every fragment points to the same conclusion. Fortress Adler existed, and whatever happened inside was meant to vanish with the Reich itself. The combination of scientific talent, SS oversight, and forced secrecy suggests an operation that exceeded even the V2 program in ambition. Whether it pursued advanced jet propulsion, energy research, or something still classified remains an open question. What is certain is that the facility's destruction was deliberate, calculated, and final. The few surviving witnesses, local residents, Allied officers, and captured scientists all describe the same moment of blinding light, followed by silence and a lingering metallic taste in the air. In 2015, declassified Austrian parliamentary records revealed an unusual budget entry from 1954, allocating funds for containment maintenance, Dachstein installation, non-disclosed. When questioned by historians, the Defense Ministry refused comment. The entry remains the only official acknowledgement that something beneath Mount Dachstein required state oversight, long after the war had ended. To this day, the coordinates once associated with Fortress Adler remain redacted in Allied and Austrian archives alike. No excavation permits have been granted in the area since 1961. The mountain stands quiet, the glaciers eroding whatever traces time has not already swallowed. Yet for those who have studied the surviving fragments, the conclusion is inescapable. Fortress Adler was real. It was built to protect knowledge the world was not meant to see, and when the Reich collapsed, that knowledge was buried in fire and stone so that no victor could claim it. Chapter 3. Echoes of the Black Vienna Files. Vienna, 1946. The war was over, but the city still bled in silence. Divided into 4 occupation zones, its grand boulevards had become a chessboard of spies, black markets, and secret exchanges. Amid this fractured peace, Soviet intelligence stumbled upon something extraordinary during a sweep of a Gestapo annex on Gonzaga Gasse Street. A locked steel cabinet marked Schwarzakte Österreich, the Black Vienna Files. Inside were 312 microfilm reels, several bound ledgers, and 2 wax-sealed envelopes stamped with the insignia of the RSHA, Reich Main Security Office. They contained details of clandestine wartime financial transfers, coded communications between industrial magnates and SS logistics officers, and a ledger listing deposit accounts across Zurich, Bern, and Buenos Aires. According to a declassified Soviet memorandum dated October 8, 1946, the Black Vienna Files were of exceptional intelligence value for identifying Axis capital flows and post-war assets. Within weeks, both American and British intelligence services learned of the discovery. A covert OSS NKVD liaison was arranged at Schönbrunn Palace under the guise of a cultural property exchange. The transaction never occurred. On the morning of November 12th, the truck transporting the files vanished en route from the Soviet command post in Favoritan district to the handover site. 3 guards were later found dead near the Danube Canal. The truck was never recovered. In 1947, OSS field operative Edward McClintock submitted a classified report to Washington stating that a portion of the files was intercepted by an unidentified intermediary group, possibly former Abwehr operatives seeking leverage. He cited informant testimony claiming that several microfilm reels had already been sold to Swiss financiers who used them to negotiate immunity from Allied prosecution. The report was buried in the OSS Transition Archive under the cryptonym Operation Ledgerfall and remained sealed until its partial release in 1983. Most of its contents are redacted, but one paragraph survives. Evidence suggests continuity of Axis industrial and banking networks through neutral intermediaries, leveraging looted assets to fund post-war reconstruction under Western oversight. Parallel to American investigations, British MI6 initiated its own probe, known internally as Project Silvershade. Headed by financial analyst Sir Reginald Phipps, the team traced post-war wire transfers linking Swiss accounts to British firms contracted under the Marshall Plan. The findings were never published. Phipps resigned abruptly in 1949 and disappeared from public record 2 months later. His estate inventory, filed in 1952, listed only one personal item of note, a briefcase labelled SAV. No explanation was ever attached to the initials. The CIA inherited the OSS archives in 1947 and reopened the case under Directorate D, Financial Intelligence Division. A memorandum dated March 15, 1951, from Assistant Director Robert Amory to CIA Chief Walter Bedell Smith reads, "The so-called Black Vienna material constitutes a serious liability if authenticated. Recommend indefinite classification under Directive 10.2 jurisdiction. Under that directive, materials deemed threatening to US foreign policy objectives were to be retained or destroyed without disclosure." The file vanished from the agency's internal index shortly thereafter. Only a cross-reference entry remained. Transferred to foreign custody, 1952. In 1954, the Austrian state treaty restored national sovereignty, but buried deep within its annexes was an unpublicized article authorizing cooperative intelligence archives management with NATO allies. Historians later discovered that this clause had been inserted at American insistence. It effectively allowed Western agencies to retain or remove classified wartime documents without Austrian oversight. Among the first collections to disappear were the remaining Gestapo financial files held in the Vienna Hofburg repository, the same building later identified as the Black Vienna Files' supposed final destination. Surviving rumors surrounding the files grew darker as the Cold War deepened. In 1960, a defector from East German intelligence, codenamed Hagen, told British debriefers that a portion of the Schwarzakte reels had been photographed and duplicated by Soviet handlers before the original disappearance. Hagen described one reel labelled Amtsli Europa Süd, containing ledgers of arms shipments disguised as Red Cross convoys, as well as names of Western intermediaries still active in industry. MI6 recorded his statement, then sealed it under Official Secrets Act protection. 2 months later, Hagen was found dead in his London safe house, apparently from carbon monoxide poisoning. No inquest followed. A key revelation came decades later, through the testimony of retired CIA archivist Joseph E. Chandler, who came forward in 1989 claiming he had handled a single surviving microfilm frame from the missing cache. According to Chandler, it contained a table of numbered accounts listing transfers through the Swiss National Bank between 1943 and 1948. Among them appeared codes later linked to Operation Safe Haven, the Allied initiative designed to trace looted Nazi gold. Yet some of those accounts, Chandler alleged, remained active into the 1960s, funding European defense projects under NATO jurisdiction. The agency dismissed his claims as unverified personal recollection. Chandler died of a heart attack the following year. Further evidence emerged in 1997 when a set of Soviet-era files declassified in Moscow contained copies of microfilm images attributed to Schwarzakte Österreich. One document lists beneficiary number 47, F. Krupp AG, post-war contractual expansion with Allied resource committees. Another references a South American funding conduit directed by an entity called Contour. Zurich B, later revealed to have ties with German expatriate networks in Buenos Aires. Financial historians identified these documents as potential proof of coordinated post-war asset laundering between former Axis corporations and Western reconstruction agencies. None of the original films were ever authenticated, and Austrian authorities denied possessing the originals. Vienna's Ministry of Justice maintains an official stance that no such files were ever archived within the Hofburg complex. Yet building blueprints from 1945 show a restricted sub-basement listed as Raum 34B, Sicherheitsspeicher, roughly beneath the north wing where the Gestapo once operated. That section remains sealed, repurposed as an archival foundation chamber inaccessible to the public. When investigative journalist Franz Habel requested access in 2003, citing Chandler's claims, the ministry's response was terse. Section 34B is structurally unstable and unsuitable for inspection. Habel persisted until 2005, when his press credentials were revoked after unauthorized contact with defense personnel. A fragment of the truth may have surfaced unintentionally in 2010, when a flood in the Hofburg archives exposed a set of decayed boxes marked Sonderverwaltung Wien 1946 size. Inside were melted microfilm strips and correspondence between Austrian industrial authorities and Allied economic missions. One partially legible sheet bore the phrase, "Transfer receipts received under directive of Black Ledger consolidation." The ministry classified the discovery within 48 hours and sealed the entire subarchive for conservation. Independent verification was denied. Today, the phrase Black Vienna Files has become a whisper among historians of wartime finance, a symbol of buried complicity and economic resurrection built upon stolen capital. Forensic accounting traces show unexplained influxes of gold and industrial shares appearing in Western European economies precisely when reconstruction aid flowed in. None of it conclusively ties to the files, but the pattern mirrors the ledgers described in Soviet and OSS records. To some, it suggests that the Reich's financial architecture survived the war, repurposed under new management. To others, it represents the greatest archival myth of post-war Europe. In the end, the truth may remain sealed beneath the Hofburg, locked behind the steel doors of Raum 34B. The Austrian government continues to deny the existence of the cache, yet every few years a rumor resurfaces, an anonymous researcher claiming to have seen a reel marked Schwarzakte Österreich, or a banker in Zurich who hints at accounts older than the Republic itself. The lines between history and cover-up blur with each retelling. What began as a confiscated set of Gestapo files has become an enduring ghost in Europe's post-war conscience. A reminder that victory often hides the traces of its own corruption, buried under the stamp of classified indefinitely. Chapter 4. Operation Ghost Quarry, the Siberian Recovery. Siberia, 1959. The Cold War had frozen more than politics. It had buried secrets beneath permafrost. Aerial reconnaissance from a US U-2 flight, designated Mission 3191A, captured a sequence of anomalous images near the Kolyma River basin. A sprawling industrial complex partly collapsed and surrounded by scorched terrain. Analysts at the National Photographic Interpretation Center initially assumed it to be an abandoned Gulag mine. Yet when infrared scans revealed lingering radiation signatures inconsistent with known Soviet weapons facilities, the site was reclassified. Its internal designation became Operation Ghost Quarry. The term first appeared in a declassified CIA memorandum dated March 12, 1960. It referred to a suspected wartime installation of German origin relocated under Soviet jurisdiction. According to intercepted GRU communications, the Soviets had cordoned off the area since 1946 under the cover of mineral extraction operations. US intelligence analysts cross-referenced the coordinates with captured German wartime documents and found a chilling correlation. In January 1944, an SS Technical Bureau request listed a transport of specialized energy research equipment from Peenemünde to an undisclosed location east of Novosibirsk. The shipment bore the cryptonym Eisenfeld Süd, meaning Ironfield South. the delivery logs disappeared at war's end. Throughout the 1960s, Soviet scientists working in closed cities near Tomsk occasionally referred to the Quarry Project, a name that did not correspond to any known mining enterprise. It wasn't until 1972, when a KGB defector named Viktor Lebedev provided testimony in Helsinki, that Western intelligence learned the phrase Stellung Nullpunkt, position 0 point. Lebedev claimed that during the final year of the war, Soviet agents under Operation Osławiakim had extracted German researchers and prototypes from Poland and Silesia, relocating them to Siberia. Among them, he said, was a propulsion engineer named Dr. Franz Mahler, formerly attached to the Luftwaffe's secret weapons division at Nordhausen. According to Lebedev, Mahler was placed in charge of Project Nullpunkt, an experiment to weaponize high-frequency energy fields for directional destruction. The facility, Lebedev said, was built over a mine because they needed depth to contain the tests. They called it the Quarry. Official Soviet archives make no mention of Mahler or of any such program. However, in 1992, after the collapse of the USSR, fragments of laboratory correspondence were uncovered in the Tomsk 7 archives. One letter, dated October 1946, written in German on Soviet stationery, references the previous arrangement in Königsberg and continuation of thermal field research with isotopic moderators. It was signed F. Mahler, Technical Group North. Those same words, Technical Group North, appear in Allied documents describing Operation Ironwave, suggesting a continuity between the Baltic experiments and what later emerged in Siberia. In 1959, the Americans had little to go on but satellite images. The facility lay within a deep valley bordered by granite cliffs, its central courtyard dominated by the outline of a cooling tower and several long structures resembling aircraft hangars. 2 weeks after the images were captured, subsequent reconnaissance flights found the site completely covered, buried under deliberate landslides. Analysts concluded that the Soviets had sealed the complex almost overnight. No human activity was detected afterward. Radiation levels in the surrounding forest remained anomalously high for months, prompting speculation of a nuclear mishap. The Soviet government issued no statement, dismissing the event as seasonal geological instability. Behind the scenes, however, the CIA launched a classified retrieval operation. Codenamed Project Rathbone, it authorized small reconnaissance teams to enter Soviet territory through third-party intermediaries. Between 1961 and 1964, 2 such teams allegedly penetrated the periphery of the Ghost Quarry Zone. Their findings were summarized in a single surviving memo. Recovered fragments of alloyed titanium composite, non-standard lattice. Samples suggest advanced metallurgy unknown to conventional weapons manufacturing. Possible pre-fission energy research. The fragments were reportedly sent to the Los Alamos Materials Research Lab, then transferred to an unspecified contractor under Defense Advanced Projects Agency oversight. The laboratory's records for those years contain an unexplained entry: Material Sample 58B, Composition Redacted, Origin, Arctic. Years later, during an internal review, a Department of Energy report referenced Siberian anomalous alloys of German design. The report, classified until 2011, included the note, cross-reference with 1944 SS Metallurgical Order 778 GRP Nord, potential link to experimental reactor components. No replication achieved. This was the first official acknowledgement that Ghost Quarry might have originated in the last months of the Third Reich. The Soviet Union maintained complete secrecy. Only in 1978 did whispers of a disaster emerge. Declassified KGB medical logs from the Magadan district list acute radiation sickness cases among personnel assigned to an unspecified engineering detachment in 1959. Of the 28 listed, 23 died within weeks. The site designation column reads simply, Zone K-17. Historians later correlated that code with the coordinates of the Ghost Quarry complex. The Soviet response was to seal the entire region and erase all related documentation. In 1989, after Chernobyl forced limited transparency about nuclear projects, a joint Soviet Academy of Sciences report briefly referenced legacy, contamination from pre-war German extraction experiments. In the Kolyma sector, Western analysts immediately, noted the term pre-war German, suggesting direct continuity from captured Nazi programs. Within days, the paragraph was struck from the public version of the report. All references to foreign origin research were deleted. When the Cold War ended, Western journalists began seeking access to Siberian archives. One of them, a British correspondent named Alan Dyer, managed to interview a retired geologist who claimed to have worked on Project Nullpunkt containment in the early 1960s. The man described descending into a half-collapsed tunnel lined with vitrified rock. The air was metallic, he said. We were told to remove any magnetic instruments. They said the field was still active. His statement was published in 1994 and quietly dismissed by Russian authorities as fabrication. Dyer died the following year in an automobile accident on the road from Yakutsk to Magadan. Scientific analysis of the so-called Nullpunkt debris recovered by Rathbone remains classified, but leaked accounts from a former Los Alamos physicist suggest the material exhibited unique electromagnetic resonance properties. When exposed to certain frequencies, it emitted low-energy pulses inconsistent with any known alloy behavior. The physicist wrote anonymously in a 1998 journal, "The samples were unlike anything I had seen, some sort of tuned lattice for field generation. They were not weapon fragments, they were components." The Department of Energy denied the existence of the samples. Today, the Ghost Quarry region remains restricted under Russian federal law as a geo-environmental hazard zone. Satellite imagery still shows faint outlines of structures buried beneath sediment and ice. The site lies at the intersection of two fault lines, yet geologists insist its symmetry is artificial. Attempts by independent explorers to reach the area have been stopped by military patrols. Officially, it is an abandoned mine contaminated by wartime waste. Unofficially, it is a grave for knowledge that both superpowers chose to forget. In 2017, a document surfaced through an anonymous digital leak titled MK Tesla Connection Dismissed. It was a single-page memorandum, classified Eyes Only, referencing Project Nullpunkt, Ghost Quarry, conclusions withheld. Every line was redacted except one. The quarry was not abandoned, it was buried. That sentence, identical to a phrase in the 1960 CIA memo, suggests deliberate coordination between both sides to suppress whatever was found. If the records are true, Operation Ghost Quarry stands as the missing bridge between Nazi wartime experimentation and Cold War energy research. A buried experiment conducted under two empires that refused to admit its existence. Whether it was a failed reactor, a prototype weapon, or something more obscure, every trace was entombed beneath Siberia's ice. The only certainty is that it was sealed not to protect lives, but to protect history from remembering what human ambition had built when the world was at its most desperate. Chapter 5. The Silent Convoy of the Barents Sea, May 1945. The war in Europe was in its final hours, but for 5 German freighters anchored in Narvik, Norway, surrender was not an option. Their hulls were marked with faded Kriegsmarine insignia and hastily painted designations: Helene, Drache, Odense, Nordlicht, and Wotan. Their manifests listed scientific cargo and precision instruments, though Allied intelligence later determined these to be false. Escorting them was U-977, one of the last operational Type 7 submarines, commanded by Oberleutnant Heinz Schäfer. Official history records: U-977's 66-day underwater voyage to Argentina as an isolated escape, but the declassified naval intercepts suggest Schäfer may have been guarding something far larger. Convoy Grau, the Grey Convoy. The convoy's departure order originated from the Kriegsmarine's Oberkommando Nordseegruppe, signed on April 28, 1945, 3 days before Hitler's death. The directive authorized the immediate evacuation of unspecified assets, critical to national continuity, via the Barents route under Operation Regenbogen, Rainbow, the code name for the self-scuttling of the German fleet. The order bore an additional notation: Priority Alpha, under supervision of Marine Sonderkommando Grau. This unit, later purged from post-war records, was rumored to have overseen shipments of classified weapons components and archives connected to the Ahnenerbe, an SS technical division. Its insignia, a stylized grey sun, matched. Emblems later found on recovered crates deep beneath Arctic. Waters' British naval listening Stations at Scarpa Flow first detected anomalous transmissions on May 3, 1945. Shortwave intercepts from U-boat frequencies referenced cargo, departure under northern lights, and destination station. Our analysts initially believed it referred to a fallback position in Trondheim, but subsequent decryptions placed the convoys heading north, toward the Barents Sea. The Royal Navy dispatched HMS Bulldog and HMS Beagle to intercept, but heavy storms and the collapse of the German command structure crippled coordination. By the time the British fleet arrived, the German vessels had vanished beyond radar range. What followed was silence, no distress calls, no wreckage, no survivors. Post-war Allied investigations classified the incident under File G227, Unresolved Maritime Activity. The file contained testimonies from Norwegian fishermen who reported seeing black shapes moving under the fog and lights below the surface like lamps under ice. Norwegian naval intelligence recovered fragments of metallic debris washed ashore near Tromsø weeks later, stamped MSG-12. No such designation existed in Kriegsmarine registries. The fragments were transferred to the Admiralty Experimental Station in Haslar, where tests revealed a unique steel composition alloyed with vanadium and chromium, similar to the material used in Type 21 U-boats, but with higher heat resistance. The samples vanished from the facility's archive in 1947. For decades, the silent convoy became a maritime legend. Skeptics dismissed it as confusion born of the war's chaotic end, until 1983, when a team of Norwegian divers led by engineer Arne Thorsen discovered a wreck 200 nautical miles north of Tromsø. The sonar readings revealed a vessel roughly 110 meters in length, resting at a depth of 280 meters. It bore unmistakable German hull design, but with structural modifications unknown in any documented class, reinforced plating along the keel, and sealed compartments devoid of hatches. Within the forward hold, the divers located several corroded crates embossed with the same grey sun insignia reported in British archives. Each crate was locked with lead seals and labelled Schwarze Sonne, Eigentum MSG. Before Thorsen's team could retrieve a sample, the Norwegian Ministry of Defence ordered the expedition halted. The site was declared a restricted zone under National Security Statute 51C. Officially, the reason was the discovery of unexploded ordnance. Unofficially, internal memos leaked years later indicated the involvement of NATO's Supreme Allied Command Atlantic, SACLANT. Within 72 hours, military vessels from Norway, Britain, and the United States converged on the coordinates. Thorsen's diving logs and photographs were confiscated, and his research permit was revoked permanently. He never dove again. Declassified Norwegian parliamentary transcripts from 1992 confirm the existence of Project Nordlys, an underwater salvage assessment conducted jointly with NATO allies in the same area. Though heavily redacted, one entry refers to containment and removal of non-conforming metallic materials of sensitive origin. Satellite imagery from the week following the operation showed temporary exclusion zones enforced by naval ships, bearing US hull numbers. When questioned, the Norwegian Defence Ministry described the mission as routine seabed mapping. The recovered debris was reportedly transported to a US facility in Keflavik, Iceland, before transfer to an undisclosed destination. A now declassified NATO logistics manifest lists sealed cargo, 11 units, weight unrecorded. That document is the last verifiable trace of the silent convoy. In 1998, Thorsen, then retired, gave an interview to a Swedish maritime journal. He described the brief moments before the shutdown order. One of the crates had split open. Inside was glass. Thick, curved panels like from a cockpit, but darker. Beneath that, metal spheres nested in shock mounts. There were markings in block letters, Energy Kammer, Prototype I-4. His statement was dismissed as senile exaggeration, yet years later, a fragmentary British report from 1946 surfaced, mentioning energy chamber components among items missing from the Kiel naval laboratories during Germany's surrender. The connection could never be confirmed. New attention resurfaced in 2014, when a Russian geological survey vessel, Professor Molchanov, recorded unexplained magnetic anomalies in the same sector. The Russian Ministry of Defense briefly announced an investigation before issuing a retraction. Within weeks, the coordinates were reclassified as a prohibited maritime area under the pretext of environmental protection. Independent satellite images from the European Space Agency showed heavy vessel activity around the zone shortly before the closure. To this day, no nation acknowledges the existence of Marine Sonderkommando Grau or the fate of its cargo. Historians who have studied the convoy suspect that the ships carried more than documents or artifacts. Some propose they transported disassembled experimental reactors or propulsion systems from Fortress Adler and Iron Wave, components of Germany's most secret technologies, relocated to prevent Allied capture. Others suggest the convoy was a decoy meant to lure pursuit while the true shipments went south toward Argentina. None of the theories explain why NATO intervened decades later to secure the site. The few physical remains tell their own story. Divers who later reached the periphery of the exclusion zone in 2001 reported sonar echoes of 5 vessels lying in close formation, their hulls oriented east to west, as though they sank deliberately, side by side. The ocean floor beneath them shows signs of subsidence, suggesting the ships settled over a trench. That trench, nicknamed the Grey Scar by Norwegian oceanographers, emits weak but persistent electromagnetic pulses. Instruments malfunction near its center. Officially, these readings are attributed to natural magnetite deposits. Unofficially, classified communications between Norwegian and US naval research divisions in 2002 reference subsurface interference linked to MSG convoy materials, and whatever rests beneath the Barents ice continues to hum faintly in the darkness, an echo of the machinery that once crossed the world under the last command of a dying empire. No wreckage has been recovered. The site remains under constant monitoring by NATO hydroacoustic stations, its coordinates omitted from public navigation charts. The official explanation remains unchanged. There was never a convoy, never a mission, and nothing lies beneath the Barents Sea worth recovering. Yet in the classified archives of 3 nations, under file headings erased and retyped through decades of secrecy, one phrase endures beside the final intelligence notation: Convoy Grau, status unknown, contents secured. By the time the world declared peace, too many pages had already been torn from its own record. Files vanished into sealed vaults, men changed names, and nations rewrote the shadows they had created. Yet through every blackout line and buried transcript, a single thread persists, proof that the Second World War never truly ended, only transformed. From the Arctic convoys that sank without trace to the bunkers that still hum beneath the soil of Saxony, and the forgotten Siberian quarries no map dares mark, the past refuses to stay silent. Somewhere within the archives that survived fire and time, fragments still whisper of the experiments, the disappearances, and the orders stamped "eyes only." Perhaps the truth is not lost. It is simply waiting for the next file to be declassified.